You know, when you book a flight, you are placing just an enormous amount of faith in what is essentially an invisible web.
Oh, absolutely.
You sit in your seat, put your tray table up, and you just trust it. You trust the aerodynamics, of course.
Right, the physics of it all.
Yeah, that the pressurized aluminum tube you're sitting in will behave the way it's supposed to. But I mean, more than that, you trust a sprawling, highly sensitive network of, well, human communication.
And radar tracking, shift scheduling, the technology.
Exactly. You trust that every single person in that chain, from the mechanic to the baggage handler to the air traffic controller, is just operating perfectly.
Because it is a choreographed dance. I mean, thousands of moving parts, relying on hundreds of independent decisions every single minute.
Yeah.
And as a society, we just expect that system to be flawless every single time a plane leaves the Earth.
But today, we're going to look at what happens when that web frays under pressure. And I want to start this deep dive with an image from our source materials that is just, well, it's breathtaking. Truly.
It really is. It's visceral.
We are looking at the aftermath of March 22, 2026. It's late at night, pouring rain on a dark, flooded runway at New York's LaGuardia Airport.
Right.
And in the center of this scene is the crumpled, smoking wreckage of a commercial jet. It's completely destroyed at the front. The fuselage is torn open, metal sheared violently. But, and this is the crazy part, if you walk away from that wreckage out into the dark tarmac for more than 100 meters, you find a 26-year veteran flight attendant.
Still strapped securely into her jump seat.
Still strapped in. I mean, she was ejected completely from the aircraft as it tore apart, thrown over a football field's distance through the air, and amazingly, she is alive.
It's an image that really forces your brain to reconcile two opposing extremes, you know?
Yeah, how do you even process that?
You have the total, violent, catastrophic failure of a machine engineered to withstand incredible forces, and right next to it, the unbelievable resilience, but also fragility of the human body.
Right. So our mission for this deep dive today isn't just to recount the tragedy of that night. We're here to reverse engineer an aviation disaster.
To take it down to the studs.
Exactly. We're going to deconstruct how a specific alignment of deteriorating weather, an entirely unrelated airplane emergency, immense systemic industry stress, and an overtaxed air traffic controller led to the fatal collision of Air Canada Express Flight 8646 and a Port Authority fire truck.
It's a massive puzzle.
It is. And we're pulling from a huge stack of sources to put this together for you. We've got breaking news reports from The Guardian and CTV, detailed factual updates from the NTSB.
National Transportation Safety Board.
Right, the NTSB. We also have aircraft specs from Safefly Aviation and some truly crucial, honestly chilling logs from the NASA Aviation Safety Reporting System.
Because the goal here is to move past the immediate shock of the collision. We have to look at the architecture of the failure.
Yeah, accidents like this don't just happen out of nowhere.
Exactly. Aviation accidents of this magnitude are rarely the result of a single, isolated mistake. They are the terminal point of a long chain of compromised redundancies.
So to understand those systemic failures, we first need to lay out the exact mechanical sequence of events. Let's look at the timeline.
Right, let's set the scene.
It's late Sunday night, March 22, 2026. We're tracking an Air Canada Express flight operated by Jazz Aviation, Flight 8646. It's a scheduled regional route flying from Montreal down to LaGuardia.
But the operational stress on this specific flight begins long before it even approaches New York airspace.
Because of the delays?
Yeah, exactly. The plane departs Montreal at 10:12 p.m. Eastern, which means it is already operating with a delay of over 2 hours.
Wow. 2 hours.
And that detail is critical when they look at human factors later on. You have a flight crew and a cabin full of passengers who've been dealing with the ambient friction and fatigue of travel delays. The operational tempo is already off rhythm.
And on top of that, they are flying directly into a rapidly deteriorating weather system.
Right. Let's examine the actual operating environment at LaGuardia around 11:30 p.m. The weather isn't just a backdrop here. It is an active participant in the disaster.
Because about 3 hours before this flight even arrived, LaGuardia operations had already officially posted warnings about flight disruptions due to weather.
Yeah. By 11:30 p.m., the airport is dealing with heavy, persistent rain. And rain introduces multiple compounding variables. First, you have standing water on the tarmac.
Which messes with the brakes.
Dramatically.
Yeah.
From an aerodynamic and mechanical perspective, standing water alters braking action. The tires of a landing aircraft have to displace that water to make contact with the asphalt, which increases the risk of hydroplaning and extends the required stopping distance.
And the visual aspect, too. All that water acts like a giant mirror.
Exactly. All the runway edge lights, centerline lights, taxiway indicators, they're all reflecting off the wet surface. It creates a massive amount of visual clutter and glare for anyone looking out a window.
Whether that's a pilot in a cockpit or a controller in the tower.
Right. And compounding that glare is the visibility metric. Meteorological data shows visibility had dropped to just 3 miles.
Which, for a car on a highway, 3 miles feels infinite.
But we have to translate that to the speed of a commercial jet on approach. A Mitsubishi CRJ900 on short final approach is traveling somewhere around 130 to 140 knots through the air.
So how fast is that in practical terms?
At that speed, you are covering a mile every 30 seconds or so. So with 3 miles of visibility, the flight crew has roughly 90 seconds from the moment they visually acquire the runway environment to the moment their wheels touch the ground.
90 seconds, that is nothing.
It's severely compressed. The crew is relying heavily on their instrument landing system and the verbal clearances coming through their headsets from the tower.
And this brings us to a critical pivot point, because the disaster doesn't actually originate with the Air Canada flight at all.
No, the dominoes start falling with a completely different aircraft on the ground.
Right. At 11:18 p.m., a United Airlines Boeing 737AX-8, operating as Flight 2384 heading to Chicago, is attempting to depart, but they abort their takeoff roll.
And they don't just do it once, they abort the takeoff twice.
Twice? Why?
The pilots were receiving anti-ice warning lights in the cockpit. In an environment with heavy precipitation and near-freezing conditions, the anti-ice system is absolutely non-negotiable.
Because ice changes the shape of the wing, right?
Precisely. Ice accumulation on the leading edge destroys lift. A warning light for that system during a takeoff roll mandates an immediate abort.
But the mechanical issues for the United flight quickly escalate into a direct safety threat for the passengers. After the aborted takeoffs, the crew notices a foul odor entering the cabin.
And several flight attendants begin feeling physically ill.
Which is terrifying. What causes that?
That specific combination of symptoms points toward a potential bleed air issue. Commercial jet cabins are pressurized using air drawn from the compressor stages of the engines. That's called bleed air.
Okay, so it's air from the engines.
Right. And if a seal leaks, synthetic engine oil can enter that air supply, vaporizing and creating a highly toxic, foul-smelling fume event in the cabin.
Oh, wow. That's a serious respiratory hazard.
It is. Recognizing the danger, the United pilots execute their emergency checklists and officially declare an emergency with LaGuardia Tower.
So suddenly, the entire architecture of the airport's operations fundamentally shifts. The air traffic controller now has an active, declared emergency on the ground.
A plane full of passengers with a potential toxic fume event requires immediate isolation and medical assessment.
But because of the weather delays and the late hour, there are no open, available gates for this United flight to safely taxi back to.
Which initiates a massive logistical cascade. The United aircraft is stranded on a taxiway.
So the Airport Operations Center has to scramble an airport firefighting truck to inspect the aircraft for smoke or fire.
Right. And a mobile stair truck has to be dispatched out onto the active tarmac to potentially evacuate the passengers directly onto the concrete.
And the vehicle dispatched to handle the fire inspection is not your standard municipal fire engine. It's designated as Truck 1, operated by the Port Authority Police Department's Aircraft Rescue and Firefighting Unit.
The specific model is an Oshkosh Striker 1500. And we really need to explain what this vehicle actually is, because its physical characteristics are central to the physics of the impending crash.
Yeah, describe this thing because it sounds massive.
It is a highly specialized, formidable piece of heavy machinery, engineered specifically for aircraft disasters. It carries 1,500 gallons of water, plus hundreds of gallons of firefighting foam and dry chemical agents.
So it's incredibly heavy.
Fully loaded, it weighs tens of thousands of pounds, it is armored, it is extremely wide, and it features a roof turret designed to physically punch through the aluminum fuselage of a burning aircraft.
To deliver fire retardant directly into the cabin? Wow.
Exactly. It is essentially a high-speed tank designed to operate in an airport environment.
And navigating a vehicle of that immense size and weight across a complex web of active runways in heavy rain, I mean, that requires absolute precision and constant communication with the tower.
But precision is precisely what evaporates at 11:37 p.m.
Right. Let's look at the fatal intersection. The Air Canada flight, the CRJ-900, has broken out of the clouds and is on short final approach. They are seconds away from touching down on runway 4.
Now, runway 4 at LaGuardia is intersected by several taxiways that vehicles use to navigate the airfield. At that exact moment, 11:37 p.m., air traffic control transmits a clearance to Truck 1.
They instruct the driver of this massive Oshkosh Striker to cross runway 4 at the intersection of taxiway Delta.
Right.
And we have to stop here and analyze the profound failure of the systems designed to prevent this exact scenario. I mean, we are talking about a major international airport in the year 2026.
And baffling.
If you have an aircraft on short final descending at hundreds of feet per minute toward the runway, how does the system allow a controller to verbally wave a 60,000-pound fire truck directly across that exact same stretch of asphalt?
Why didn't an automated fail-safe physically stop the truck or force the plane to abort?
Exactly.
It really highlights a persistent vulnerability in ground operations. In the air, commercial aircraft are equipped with TCAS, the Traffic Collision Avoidance System.
Great, the system that talks to other planes.
Yeah, if two planes get too close in the sky, their transponders talk to each other, and the onboard computers literally shout at the pilots to climb or descend. It overrides human error. But on the ground, that automated safety net is remarkably fragmented.
Because TCAS doesn't talk to ground vehicles, the plane's computer has no idea the fire truck is there.
Exactly. Ground movement relies on airport surface detection equipment, usually a system called ASDX. It combines radar and transponder data to give the tower a top-down map of everything moving on the airfield.
And some airports have those runway status lights.
Yeah. The red lights embedded in the pavement that automatically illuminate if a runway is unsafe to enter. But those systems are only as good as the visibility of the lights in heavy rain, and ultimately the mental model of the human operating them.
Which goes back to the weather. In low visibility, with heavy rain smearing the tower windows and radar screens cluttered with precipitation returns, the controller's mental map is the primary line of defense.
And in this instance, that mental map fractured. The controller issues the clearance for the truck to cross.
So the driver of the Oshkosh Striker, who is just following instructions and probably hyper-focused on getting to the United Emergency, begins to roll across the runway holding lines.
And seconds later, the controller realizes the catastrophic geometry of what is unfolding.
He keys the microphone. The audio from the tower records him saying, "Stop, truck 1, stop," and then he repeats it 12 times in a span of 10 seconds.
12 times in 10 seconds.
The cadence of that transmission is just horrifying to listen to. You can hear the realization of the inevitable physics settling into his voice.
But the physical reality of moving a fully loaded, water-heavy fire truck means that even slamming on the brakes requires stopping distance. The truck is already occupying the runway space.
At 11:38 p.m., the Air Canada CRJ-900 touches down. Flight tracking data indicates the aircraft is moving at an estimated ground speed of 81 to 91 knots at the moment of touchdown.
Let's convert that to understand the kinetic energy. We're talking about roughly 150 to 170 kilometers per hour.
A commercial jet carrying 76 human beings, weighing tens of thousands of pounds, moving at highway speeds directly into an armored, water-filled barricade.
The physics of an impact under those parameters are unsurvivable for the immediate points of contact. Airport security camera footage captures the moment. The aircraft strikes the rear right side of the fire truck.
And the sheer transfer of kinetic energy is staggering.
The driver of the truck seemingly attempts an evasive maneuver at the last possible millisecond, turning the wheel to escape the path. But the impact force flips the massive Oshkosh Striker completely over.
Which is insane to think about, given how heavy that truck is.
Right. Meanwhile, the CRJ-900 takes the brunt of the collision at its most structurally vulnerable point. The nose cone, the flight deck, and the forward galley of the aircraft are entirely obliterated.
The structural integrity of the front third of the plane just shears away completely.
And the remainder of the aircraft, propelled by its forward momentum, violently skids off the runway into the grassy area near taxiway Echo.
Yet, within this horrific transfer of energy, the data and eyewitness accounts point to an extraordinary action taken by the flight crew in those final seconds.
Yeah, surviving passengers reported feeling the aircraft brake incredibly hard immediately after touchdown, fractions of a second before the impact.
Which tells us that the pilots, Antoine Forrest and Mackenzie Gunther, visually acquired the obstruction through the rain and the glare just as their wheels hit the tarmac.
And the reaction time required to initiate max manual braking and potentially deploy thrust reversers in that microscopic window of time is a testament to their training.
A passenger interviewed by the media later stated that the pilots, quote, kind of saved our lives.
And from an accident survivability standpoint, they are absolutely right. By utilizing incredible reflexes to scrub even 10 or 15 knots of speed before the collision, they reduce the total kinetic energy of the impact.
Because if they had hit it at full speed,
Had they struck the truck at their full touchdown speed, the sheer rotational force could have caused the entire fuselage to cartwheel, break apart into multiple sections, or rupture the center fuel tanks.
which would have led to a catastrophic post-crash fire.
Exactly. Their final act minimized the devastation for the passengers behind them.
That reality really forces us to confront the profound human toll of this event. Because when we analyze the aftermath, we have to hold an impossible survival and an abrupt, devastating tragedy in the exact same breath.
Which brings us back to that opening image of Solange Tremblay.
Yes. Her survival challenges are basic understanding of crash dynamics. Solange is a flight attendant who began her career with Jazz Aviation 26 years ago.
During the landing phase, she was seated in the forward jump seat. The jump seat is a fold-down chair, specifically designated for cabin crew, equipped with a multi-point harness, and it is located directly behind the cockpit door.
Which means she was physically located in the exact section of the aircraft that absorbed the direct, obliterating force of the fire truck.
When the nose of the plane struck the armored side of the Oshkosh, the deceleration functions were so violent and instantaneous that the structural mounts connecting the cockpit and forward galley to the rest of the fuselage sheared completely.
The forward section essentially exploded.
Yeah, Solange's jump seat was physically ripped from its bulkhead mountings. The inertia carried her, still strapped tightly into the harness of that detached seat, out of the disintegrating aircraft.
Rescue crews found her over 100 meters away from the main wreckage, out in the dark, in the pouring rain on the wet concrete.
And she suffered multiple bone fractures, including a broken leg that required immediate surgery, but she was alive and conscious.
Her daughter, Sarah Lepine, gave an interview to Quebec's TVA News. She said, "It's a complete miracle. She had a guardian angel watching over her. It could have been much worse."
It certainly speaks to the rigorous engineering standards of the jump seat harness itself. The webbing and the buckles held firm under immense G-loads. But beyond the engineering, it is simply an unfathomable stroke of statistical luck.
Right. Because the reality for the two individuals seated just a few feet in front of her was entirely different. The cockpit, representing the very tip of the spear in this collision, was crushed instantly.
Both pilots were killed on impact.
And we really must acknowledge the human beings behind the controls here. These were two young professionals who had dedicated their lives to mastering this incredibly complex profession.
Antoine Forrest was just 30 years old, hailing from a city southwest of Montreal. He had joined Jazz Aviation in 2022, building his career in the regional network.
And the first officer, Mackenzie Gunther, was at the very beginning of his journey. He was a recent graduate from Seneca College's highly respected aviation program, class of 2023.
He had joined Jazz immediately after graduation through their Direct Pathways program. This flight was supposed to be the foundational building block of a decades-long career in the sky.
Their loss sent immediate shockwaves through the tight-knit Canadian aviation community. When we study the NTSB dockets and the flight data recorders, it becomes really easy to view accidents purely as data sets, you know?
It does. It gets very clinical.
But the public tributes provide the necessary emotional anchor to the tragedy. I want to share the tribute posted on Facebook by Antoine Forrest's brother, Cedric, because it strips away the technical jargon and leaves you with the raw grief of the aftermath.
Please do.
He wrote, "Have a good flight, my brother. Oh yes, we've heard that phrase often, but this time it will be the last. You were always coming and going, always full of new projects. You left us again, too soon to say goodbye. I love you, my brother. You can leave with your head held high."
It completely grounds the scope of the incident. There are families, friends, and colleagues whose lives are permanently altered by a sequence of events that unfolded in a matter of seconds.
Absolutely. And the scale of the human impact extends throughout the cabin. In total, there were 76 people on board Flight 800 and 646, 72 passengers, and 4 crew members.
Following the crash, a massive mass casualty response was initiated by the city of New York in the middle of a torrential rainstorm.
Ultimately, 41 people were transported to hospitals. This included the 2 Port Authority officers inside the fire truck who suffered severe injuries, including broken limbs, from the rollover.
Patients were distributed across Level 1 trauma centers in the area, such as Elmhurst Hospital and New York Presbyterian Queens. By the following day, 9 individuals still remained under serious medical care.
And managing a triage and transport operation of that magnitude on an active airfield in the dark with hazardous aviation fuel leaking and heavy rain falling, I mean, that is a massive logistical undertaking for the first responders.
Unbelievably difficult.
So as we process the human cost, we have to return to the core question of this deep dive. We know the mechanical sequence of how the plane and the truck collided. We know the physics. But why?
Right. Why issue the clearance?
Why did a highly trained air traffic controller clear a massive truck to cross an active runway precisely when a commercial jet was landing? To answer that, we have to go inside the control tower.
The audio recordings captured by Live ATC, which were subsequently released to the public, provide a raw, unfiltered auditory window into the immediate aftermath inside that tower cab. It is profoundly difficult to listen to.
You hear the controller breathing heavily. The shock is just evident in his voice, openly admitting the error to his colleagues in the room. He says, "I messed up. I tried to reach out. We were dealing with an emergency earlier."
And in a heartbreaking moment of camaraderie amidst the horror, you hear a fellow controller try to offer comfort, replying, "Nah, man, you did the best you could."
That specific exchange is really the Rosetta Stone for understanding the psychology of this accident. The controller wasn't being negligent or reckless.
No, not at all. He was falling victim to a well-documented psychological and physiological phenomenon known as task saturation.
We need to explain the mechanics of task saturation clearly, because this is where the processing power of the human brain hits a hard biological wall.
Think of working memory, the part of the brain responsible for holding and manipulating information in real time, as a bottleneck. In routine operations, an air traffic controller processes a steady flow of data. Radar blips, verbal readbacks, weather updates. The brain handles this rhythmically.
It's just muscle memory at that point.
Right. But when a high-stakes, novel event occurs, like the United Airlines aircraft suddenly aborting takeoff and declaring a toxic fuel emergency, the brain's threat detection system activates.
And that changes how the brain processes information.
Dramatically. This triggers a massive influx of new, urgent tasks. Communicating with the pilots, coordinating the fire trucks, analyzing taxiway routes, and anticipating the medical response.
And because working memory has a finite capacity, adding all those high-priority tasks simultaneously forces the brain to start dropping routine information just to keep up.
Precisely. This leads directly to a state of cognitive tunneling. Under extreme stress, the human brain literally narrows its focus to the single most immediate threat.
So the controller became hyper-focused on managing the United emergency.
Exactly. And in doing so, his situational awareness of the broader airfield degraded. The approaching Air Canada flight, which was executing a routine non-emergency landing, essentially vanished from his active working memory.
Even though it was right there on the screen.
He could look directly at the radar screen displaying the approaching aircraft, and his eyes would physically see the data, but his saturated brain could not process its significance in relation to the fire truck he was routing.
It's a terrifying vulnerability of the human mind. But this is exactly where I have to challenge the structural setup of the tower that night.
The staffing configuration.
Yes, let's look at the operational context. The FAA database from 2025 showed that LaGuardia was the 19th busiest airport in the United States, boarding nearly 17 million passengers.
It is a vital artery of global commerce.
So why on earth is one single human brain forced to act as the sole bottleneck during an active emergency? Where is the systemic redundancy?
That is the central question the NTSB investigators are zeroing in on. The preliminary reports reveal a critical detail about the staffing configuration in the tower at the time of the crash.
There were actually two controllers in the tower, right?
Yes, there were two controllers physically present and working in the tower cab.
Yeah.
However, only a single controller was actively working the radios. He was handling both the ground control frequency and the local air control frequency simultaneously.
Meaning he was communicating with the fire truck maneuvering on the ground on one channel and coordinating the Air Canada flight descending from the sky on another channel, acting as his own isolated middleman.
Exactly. This practice is known as combining operational positions. Late at night, as the sheer volume of air traffic decreases, it is standard procedure at many airports worldwide to consolidate these roles to allow other controllers to take mandatory breaks or handle administrative duties.
But while it makes sense from a purely mathematical volume perspective, it strips away the most critical layer of safety redundancy, which is a second pair of ears and eyes.
When the positions are split, if a ground controller inadvertently clears a vehicle onto an active runway, The air controller managing the landing aircraft is actively monitoring the situation and can intervene.
But when one person is performing both roles during a cascading emergency, the safety net is completely removed.
It's just gone.
Which brings us to a part of the source material that is profoundly frustrating. Because as we widen the lens on this deep dive, we realize this wasn't a freak one-in-a-million confluence of events.
No, the system had been flashing bright red warning lights for months.
And the industry failed to stop the train. Let's examine the NASA ARSRS logs. Can you explain what those are?
The NASA Aviation Safety Reporting System is a vital tool in the industry. It is a confidential, voluntary reporting mechanism where pilots, controllers, and dispatchers can log safety concerns, near misses, or procedural flaws without fear of disciplinary action or FAA enforcement.
So it's basically an anonymous tip line for safety issues.
Exactly. It is designed to catch systemic issues before they result in bent metal. And the logs regarding operations at LaGuardia in the months leading up to this crash are absolutely chilling.
The Guardian actually published an extensive analysis of these NASA logs, and reading through them feels like watching a horror movie where the characters are actively pointing out the monster in the house, but nobody is turning on the lights.
That's a great analogy.
Months prior to the collision, aviation professionals were logging anonymous, desperate plays. One pilot explicitly wrote, "Please do something. The pace of operations is building in LGA. The controllers are pushing the line."
The phrase pushing the line is highly indicative of an eroded safety culture. But there was another specific report submitted by a pilot that should have triggered an immediate operational review.
Which one?
This pilot noted that during days with severe thunderstorm activity, the environment and pressure at LaGuardia felt exactly like Ronald Reagan National Airport did before the accident there.
Oh, wow. For those who might not be familiar with the history of commercial aviation disasters, that comparison is incredibly ominous.
It really is.
The pilot is referring to the crash of Air Florida Flight 90, which plunged into the frozen Potomac River in Washington, D.C., shortly after takeoff in January 1982.
The conditions that day were characterized by severe winter weather, massive departure delays, and intense, palpable pressure from both the airlines and the airport to keep the traffic flowing despite the deteriorating environment.
And the crew of Flight 90 succumbed to that pressure. They rushed their anti-icing procedures, failed to activate engine anti-ice systems, and the aircraft stalled, killing 78 people.
So by invoking the ghost of Air Florida Flight 90, the pilot submitting that NASA report was making a clear, urgent diagnosis. The culture at LaGuardia is prioritizing operational flow and speed over the preservation of safety margins.
And a disaster is mathematically inevitable.
And this wasn't just an abstract feeling of unease among the flight crews either. The data shows a documented escalating pattern of physical near misses on the airfield at LaGuardia in the preceding months.
Like the incident in July.
Right. In July of the previous year, an aircraft was cleared by ground control to cross an active runway, while another commercial jet was actively landing on that very same runway.
Which is the exact same geographical scenario as our fatal crash.
Identical. But in the July incident, a different controller in the tower realized the conflict and yelled "stop" over the radio with enough time for the crossing aircraft to halt before entering the runway surface.
Then, a few months later in October, the system failed to catch the error in time, resulting in a physical collision between two Delta jets on a taxiway.
Fortunately, they were moving at taxi speeds, resulting only in vehicle damage and no fatalities.
When you look at those preceding events, the July runway incursion and the October taxiway collision, we have to talk about how organizations process warnings. I want to bring up the sociological framework of the normalization of deviance.
Ah, yes. Diane Vaughn's work.
Exactly. This term was famously coined by the sociologist Diane Vaughn during her exhaustive investigation into the 1986 Space Shuttle Challenger disaster. Vaughn discovered that the catastrophic failure of the O-rings on the solid rocket boosters wasn't a sudden, unforeseen anomaly.
The engineers had observed the O-ring sustaining damage from hot gases on previous successful shuttle flights.
But because the shuttle returned safely despite the damage, the management culture slowly began to view that dangerous anomaly as an acceptable, routine characteristic of the system. They normalized the deviance from the safety standard.
It is a brilliant and tragic framework to apply to aviation safety. When an operating environment like LaGuardia routinely experiences close calls, aborted landings due to runway incursions or minor taxiway bumps, and those incidents do not result in a mass casualty event, the psychological baseline shifts.
The near misses stop being treated as blaring sirens.
Right. They stop demanding systemic reform and instead become accepted as the cost of doing business. Just a busy Tuesday at a major hub. The organizational system learns the wrong lesson. It learns that it can continuously push the operational line, operate with degraded safety margins, and still get away with it.
Until the exact right sequence of errors lines up on a rainy night in March, and the physics dictate that you don't get away with it anymore.
Exactly. The normalization of deviance blinds the organization to its own fragility.
And to understand the root cause of why the controllers at LaGuardia felt they had to push the line, we have to pull the lens back even further. We need to look at the macroeconomic and political forces that were actively cracking the foundation of the North American aviation network.
This wasn't just a localized cultural issue at one airport.
No, this is a story about a massive system under profound strain. Let's look at the labor shortage. The raw numbers are stark.
U.S. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy went on record noting that LaGuardia has an established staffing target of 37 fully certified air traffic controllers to operate the facility safely and efficiently.
But at the time of the collision, the tower was operating with only 33 fully certified professional controllers, alongside 7 trainees.
On paper, being down 4 fully certified controllers out of 37 might not sound like a catastrophic deficit.
It sounds like, just a slight understaffing issue.
But in an environment managing millions of passengers and hyper-complex airspace, being down 4 experts represents thousands of hours of missing experience. It means mandatory overtime, compressed schedules, and a massive increase in the ambient fatigue levels of the workforce.
And fixing that deficit is incredibly difficult because of the rigorous nature of the profession. You cannot simply hire someone off the street, put them through a weekend seminar, and plug them into an empty radar console.
Not at all. Training an air traffic controller is one of the most demanding cognitive pipelines in the world. It requires extraordinary spatial reasoning, the ability to mentally rotate 3D objects in real time, and exceptional stress tolerance.
Depending on the facility, achieving the status of a certified professional controller takes anywhere from 10 to 27 months.
And even then, the failure rates are incredibly high. This isn't just an American issue either. The source materials point out that NAV Canada, the private corporation that owns and operates Canada's Civil Air Navigation Service, is facing the exact same demographic and training struggles.
Their chief human resources officer reported that the graduation rate for their air traffic control trainees is hovering around a mere 40%.
More than half of the highly vetted candidates who enter the training program wash out because the cognitive demands of the job are simply too high to compromise on.
So we have a system that is inherently fragile, struggling to staff its towers and managing an ever-increasing volume of post-pandemic travel demand. And then onto this already brittle structure, a massive external political anvil is dropped.
The government shutdown.
Yes, we have to discuss the mechanics of the 2026 United States government shutdown. And to be clear for you listening, our analysis here is strictly impartial, focused solely on the logistical and operational realities, as documented by the investigative sources. We aren't taking sides, we're just looking at how this impacted operations.
Right. At the time of this crash, in March 2026, the U.S. government was embroiled in a partial shutdown, specifically centered over funding for the Department of Homeland Security.
And the downstream operational effects of that political gridlock on the aviation sector were immediate and severe, because the Transportation Security Administration, the TSA, operates under the umbrella of Homeland Security.
Meaning thousands of TSA agents were forced to work for weeks without receiving a paycheck.
The economic reality of that situation is pretty straightforward. People cannot afford to pay for the gas required to commute to a demanding job that is not currently paying them.
This predictably led to massive, widespread sickouts among the security screeners. As a result, the security checkpoints at airports across the country became severe bottlenecks, leading to concourses packed with thousands of delayed, frustrated passengers.
To combat the localized chaos, the Trump administration authorized the deployment of Immigration and Customs Enforcement (IC) agents to various understaffed airports to assist in managing the crowds and facilitating the security lines.
But introducing personnel not specifically trained in aviation security protocols into a highly stressed environment only added to the overall friction of the system. The entire airport ecosystem was operating at maximum tension.
And the most profound illustration of how this macro-level political gridlock physically impeded safety operations came directly from the NTSB. Jennifer Homendy, the chair of the NTSB and the individual overseeing the investigation of this fatal crash, disclosed a staggering detail to the press.
She reported that one of her key specialized air traffic control investigators was delayed in Houston for 3 hours.
A 3-hour delay is critical in the context of an aviation disaster investigation. When a crash occurs, the NTSB dispatches a GO team.
Which is a roster of specialized experts who are on call 24/7. Their mandate is to reach the crash site as rapidly as possible because evidence is highly perishable.
Wreckage gets moved to clear runways, fluid patterns on the tarmac wash away in the rain, and human memory, specifically the recollections of the controllers and pilots involved, begins to degrade or become influenced by media reports.
Yet this crucial investigator was stuck standing in a severely compromised TSA security line in Houston, trying to get on a commercial flight to New York.
Homendy stated that her agency had to literally make phone calls to high-level officials and beg just to get their investigator pushed through the security checkpoint so they could do their job.
It is a perfect illustration of how interdependent these systems are.
If you restrict funding to the security checkpoints, the operational flow of the airport breaks down, the stress on the J agents and flight crews escalates, the pressure on the air traffic controllers to manage delayed flights intensifies, and finally, the mechanisms designed to investigate the resulting failures are physically blocked from functioning.
The strain cascaded from the highest levels of government bureaucracy all the way down to a solitary, fatigued controller staring at a radar screen in a dark tower while the rain fell.
That holistic view is essential. The collision was the kinetic release of all that accumulated systemic pressure.
Which leads us into the final phase of our analysis, the machine itself and the official architecture of the investigation.
Right. Once the human psychological factors, the weather variables, and the systemic organizational failures align, the unyielding laws of physics take command. Let's look closer at the aircraft involved.
The aircraft was a Mitsubishi CRJ-900. If you have taken a regional connecting flight anywhere in North America over the past 2 decades, there's a very high probability you have flown on this exact type of airframe.
Originally developed and manufactured by the Canadian aerospace company Bombardier, before the entire program was acquired by Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, the CRJ-900 series is the undisputed workhorse of the short-haul aviation market.
The specific jet operating as Flight 8656 was 20 years old, originally delivered to the airline in 2005. It is designed to carry up to 90 passengers in a standard configuration.
It is powered by 2 General Electric CF34 turbofan engines mounted on the rear fuselage. It cruises comfortably at Mach 0.82, and it boasts a maximum operating altitude of 41,000 feet.
Its design philosophy is really centered around operational flexibility and efficiency. It allows airlines to provide frequent service to smaller regional airports while still carrying a dense enough passenger load to remain profitable.
And across its operational history, the CRJ series has maintained a stellar, highly respected safety record.
The airframe is robust and reliable. But as with any commercial aircraft, its engineering parameters are focused on aerodynamic efficiency and surviving the rigors of flight, turbulence, pressurization cycles, and hard landings.
It is emphatically not engineered to withstand a high-speed head-on collision with a fortified 60,000-pound armored fire truck on a runway.
No, absolutely not. The immediate physical aftermath of that collision created total operational chaos throughout the tightly packed New York airspace. Upon the crash, the FAA immediately issued a comprehensive ground stop.
LaGuardia Airport was completely shut down to all air traffic until 2 p.m. the following day.
The cascading effect was instantaneous. Incoming flights destined for LaGuardia had to execute missed approaches and were diverted to alternate airports, primarily John F. Kennedy International and Newark Liberty International.
But the resilience of the regional network was further tested when Newark suffered its own entirely unrelated emergency.
Early the next morning, as diverted traffic piled up, reports emerged of smoke in the Newark Air Traffic Control Tower,
which necessitated an immediate evacuation of the Newark Tower personnel and triggered another distinct ground stop. For a period of hours, the entire New York metropolitan airspace, one of the most congested corridors on the planet, was essentially choked off.
Back on the ground at LaGuardia, the physical recovery was painstaking. Runway 4 remained officially closed for days following the reopening of the rest of the airport.
NTSB Chair Homendy noted during a briefing that the violent nature of the impact resulted in a tremendous amount of debris.
We are talking about sheared metal, interior cabin components, personal luggage, and hundreds of gallons of hazardous materials. jet fuel, hydraulic fluid, and firefighting foam scattered across acres of the airfield.
Every single piece of debris had to be meticulously mapped, photographed, and cataloged before the concrete could be cleared and inspected for structural damage.
The process of officially piecing together a disaster of this magnitude is governed by heavily codified international protocols. Because the airline, Air Canada, and the regional operator, Jazz Aviation, are Canadian entities, the Transportation Safety Board of Canada, the TSB, immediately dispatched their own team of investigators to deploy to New York.
They operate in a cooperative capacity alongside the American NTSB. This cross-border collaboration is a standard and vital component of international aviation investigations, ensuring transparency and shared expertise.
A crucial early victory for the investigative teams was the recovery of the aircraft's flight recorders. The NTSB confirmed that both the cockpit voice recorder, the CVR, and the flight data recorder, the FDR, commonly referred to as the black boxes, were retrieved from the tail section of the wreckage completely undamaged.
Which is huge. The data contained within those solid-state drives is invaluable. The flight data recorder tracks thousands of parameters multiple times per second.
Everything from engine thrust and control yoke inputs to the exact millisecond the brakes were applied and the anti-skid systems engaged.
And by correlating that data with the cockpit voice recorder, which captures not just the pilot's voices, but ambient cockpit sounds like warning chimes and the physical sound of the impact, investigators can build a flawless, objective, digital reconstruction of the flight's final moments.
But synthesizing that data takes time. The investigation timeline demands patience from a public that often wants immediate answers. The NTSB is mandated to issue a preliminary report within 30 days.
However, that document is purely factual. It will state the undisputed facts of the timeline, the weather, and the communications, but it will pointedly refrain from drawing any analytical conclusions.
The final report, which will determine the official probable cause and issue formal safety recommendations, is a massive undertaking that will take anywhere from 12 to 24 months to publish.
And the core focus of that extended investigation will be distinguishing the direct cause from the root causes. The direct cause is already evident. A controller cleared a vehicle onto an active runway in front of a landing aircraft.
But the NTSB's true mandate is to peel back the layers of the organizational onion. They will scrutinize the controller's shift schedules over the preceding month to evaluate cumulative fatigue.
They will analyze the exact geographic position and lighting configuration of the fire truck to determine if architectural blind spots or rain-induced glare contributed to the controller's loss of situational awareness.
They will extensively model the emergency response to the United flight to determine if the lack of available gates created an operational compression that forced too many moving parts into an unmanageable time window.
And they will rigorously question the FAA's procedures regarding the staffing of single controllers on combined frequencies during severe weather operations.
They are not conducting a criminal investigation to assign blame to one individual. They are performing a systemic autopsy to find the exact alignment of holes in the Swiss cheese that allowed this tragedy to occur.
We have covered a tremendous amount of ground today on this deep dive, and it is a heavy, incredibly complex journey to process. We started with the unimaginable contrast of the wreckage. The miraculous survival of a flight attendant violently thrown out into the cold rain, existing in the same physical space as the devastating loss of two young, dedicated pilots at the front of that aircraft.
We moved inside the intense, pressurized environment of the control tower, listening to the agonizing audio of a professional, realizing his mental map had fractured under the crushing biological weight of task saturation.
We uncovered the ignored NASA warnings, the desperate documented pleas from pilots who saw the cultural normalization of deviance playing the system months in advance.
And we zoomed out to the macro level, seeing how chronic labor shortages, rigorous training bottlenecks, and sweeping political gridlock all conspired to stress the North American aviation network to its absolute breaking point.
The profound takeaway from this disaster is the realization that safety in the skies isn't just about the aerodynamics of a wing or the reliability of a turbofan engine or the sophistication of weather radar.
No, it is fundamentally about the mental well-being and cognitive load of the human beings sitting in the dark tower.
It is about adequately funding the unglamorous, invisible systemic redundancies that support them.
I think if there's a final thought you should mull over after listening to all this, it's this. If our entire aviation safety system continues to rely on human beings achieving absolute, continuous perfection in a highly imperfect, intensely stressful, and chronically underfunded environment, we are ultimately regulating the wrong end of the problem.
You can't just expect people to be perfect robots.
Exactly. Punishing a fatigued controller for a lapse in working memory or expecting pilots to perfectly execute evasive maneuvers in a fraction of a second in the dark ignores the reality of human biology. The ultimate engineering challenge moving forward is not how to train humans to stop making errors. It's how to design ground-based automated technologies and vehicle-to-vehicle communication networks that assume the human will eventually fail, intervening physically to prevent the collision before the web completely snaps.